The massive conference hall hummed with a low energy that made the air itself seem alive. Dr. Rackstool adjusted his ceremonial robes as he reviewed the datapad one final time before his presentation. The Galactic Medical Council had assembled. Representatives from 12 different species, each one eager to hear his assessment of the newest members to join their interstellar community. Humans. The word left a bitter taste in his four-chambered brain. For 300 cycles, he had studied the genetic codes of countless species across the galaxy. He had unraveled the quantum-encoded mysteries of Altarian DNA, deciphered the crystalline matrices that made up Vorthan genetic structure, and even mapped the biomechanical fusion codes of the warrior Kelrathi. Each discovery had reinforced his belief that evolution naturally progressed toward perfection, toward elegant solutions that maximized efficiency while minimizing waste. Then came the humans. Rackstool stepped onto the presentation platform, his crystalline neural network flickering with barely contained disgust. The holographic display materialized above him, showing a three-dimensional model of human genetic code. The double helix structure rotated slowly, its chaotic patterns visible to every delegate in the massive chamber. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying biological perfection. "Today, we examine the genetic foundation of the species that calls itself Homo sapiens. What you see before you represents perhaps the most primitive and disorganized genetic structure we have encountered in our recorded history." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. The Altarian representative, her quantum-encoded form shimmering with curiosity, leaned forward in her crystalline chair. The Vorthan delegate's biomechanical limbs clicked softly as he adjusted his viewing angle. Even the normally stoic Kelrathi warrior showed interest. His enhanced neural implants glowing brighter, Rackstool manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on specific sections of the human genome. Observe the inefficiency. Random mutations scattered throughout the code like debris in a stellar wind. Redundant sequences that serve no apparent purpose. And here, he highlighted a particularly chaotic section, what the humans themselves called junk DNA. They have named it well. The Nivarian doctor's four-chambered brain processed the genetic information with lightning speed, his crystalline neural network analyzing patterns that would take lesser species hours to comprehend. In our own genetic codes, we see purpose. The Altarians achieved quantum encoding that allows for instantaneous adaptation to environmental changes. The Vorthans developed crystalline matrices that can process genetic information at the molecular level. The Kelrathi perfected biomechanical fusion that grants them enhanced physical capabilities. He paused, allowing the delegates to absorb the comparison. But humans? Their genetic code appears to be the result of random chance rather than intelligent design, no optimization. No elegant solutions. No evidence of evolutionary progress toward perfection. From the observation deck above, Ambassador Thomas Reed watched the proceedings with growing tension. The human delegation had been relegated to the upper level, treated more like curious specimens than equal participants in the galactic community. Around him, the other human representatives shifted uncomfortably as their species was systematically dismantled by the alien doctor's analysis. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, the head of the human medical team, clenched her fists as she listened to the presentation. She had spent years studying comparative genetics, and she knew that Rackstool's assessment was based on incomplete understanding. But the Galactic Medical Council had made it clear that humans were not permitted to participate in the discussion until after the formal evaluation was complete. The human immune system, Rackstool continued, represents a particularly glaring example of evolutionary failure. Rather than developing sophisticated defenses like our own species, humans rely on what can only be described as biological chaos. Their immune responses are unpredictable, often causing more damage to their own bodies than to the threats they face. The doctor manipulated the display again, showing the complex immune pathways that other species had developed over millions of years of evolution. The Altarians can adapt their immune systems in real time using quantum processing. The Vorthons maintain crystalline defensive matrices that can identify and neutralize threats at the cellular level. The Kelrothi have biomechanical immune systems that can literally rebuild damaged tissue in minutes. He turned back to the human genetic code, his expression one of scientific disdain. Humans, by contrast, rely on crude inflammatory responses and hope that their chaotic genetic lottery will somehow produce the right antibodies. It is a system that fails as often as it succeeds, and even when it works, it does so through brute force rather than elegant design. The delegates began to murmur among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of alien sounds. The Altarian representative's quantum form flickered with what might have been amusement. The Vorthon delegate's biomechanical parts whirred softly as he processed the information. The Kelrothi warrior's neural implants pulsed with the rhythm of his enhanced thought patterns. Raxtool waited for the discussion to die down before continuing. The implications of this genetic analysis are clear. Humans represent a species that has somehow achieved interstellar travel despite fundamental biological limitations. Their genetic code suggests that they are barely past the primitive stages of evolution. They lack the sophisticated biological systems that characterize truly advanced species. He gestured toward the observation deck where the human delegation sat. This is not intended as an insult to our new galactic neighbors. Evolution is a process, and not all species develop at the same rate. However, from a medical perspective, we must acknowledge the reality of human biological limitations. The Nuvarian doctor began outlining his recommendations. Given the primitive nature of human genetic structure, I propose that they be classified as a Tier 7 species for medical purposes. This classification would provide them with basic healthcare support while acknowledging their biological limitations. Advanced medical procedures and genetic therapies should be restricted until such time as their species undergoes further evolutionary development. The suggestion sparked immediate debate among the delegates. The Altarian representative's quantum form brightened as she prepared to speak. The Vorthon delegate's mechanical parts began calculating the implications. The Kelrothi warrior's neural implants pulsed faster as he processed the strategic significance of the classification. Furthermore, Raxtool continued, I recommend that human medical care be handled primarily by automated systems. Their biological simplicity means that advanced medical personnel would be underutilized in treating human patients. Medical drones should be sufficient for most human healthcare needs. Thomas Reed felt his jaw clench as he listened to his species being relegated to the status of evolutionary inferiors. The other human delegates around him showed similar reactions, but they remained silent. The rules of the Galactic Medical Council were clear. Species under evaluation could not participate in the discussion until after the formal assessment was complete. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her scientific mind racing as she listened to the systematic dismissal of human biology. She knew that Raxtool's analysis was based on surface-level observations and cultural assumptions about genetic perfection. But she also knew that challenging the assessment would require more than just academic arguments. In conclusion, Dr. Raxtool announced, his crystalline neural network flickering with satisfaction, humans represent an interesting case study in how primitive species can achieve technological advancement despite biological limitations. However, their genetic chaos and evolutionary inefficiency make them unsuitable for integration into advanced galactic medical systems. I recommend immediate classification as Tier 7 species with restricted access to sophisticated medical technologies. The vote was swift and unanimous. Every delegate supported the classification, their various forms of agreement creating a cacophony of alien sounds. The human delegation watched in silence as their species was officially classified as genetically inferior, medically primitive, and evolutionarily stunted. As the formal session ended, Thomas Reed stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. He had expected this outcome, but hearing it spoken aloud still stung. The galaxy's most advanced species had looked at humanity and seen nothing but chaos and inefficiency. They had no idea how wrong they were. The emergency klaxons pierced through the normally peaceful atmosphere of Centauri Station like a blade through silk. Dr. Rackstool jerked awake in his quarters, his four-chambered brain immediately alert despite the deep sleep cycle he had been enjoying. The station's artificial gravity felt different somehow, heavier, as if the very structure was straining against some invisible force. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Medical Council's evaluation of human genetics. The humans had been quietly integrated into the station's population, relegated to lower-level positions and basic duties while the more advanced species handled the important work. Rackstool had barely given them another thought, his attention focused on more pressing matters, like the upcoming xenobiology conference and his research into Kelrathi, biomechanical regeneration. The klaxons continued their urgent wail as Rackstool stumbled toward his communication console. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the worried face of Dr. Veltar, the station's chief medical officer. Her Altarian features were normally composed of shifting quantum patterns, but now they seemed agitated, unstable. Rackstool, we need you in Medical Bay 7 immediately, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated extreme stress. We have a situation. The corridors of Centauri Station had never seemed so long. As Rackstool hurried through the transport tubes, he noticed other beings moving with unusual urgency. Vorthan delegates clustered in small groups, their crystalline forms flickering with nervous energy. Kelrathi warriors moved with the careful precision of predators sensing danger. Even the normally serene Altarians seemed on edge, their quantum forms shifting more rapidly than usual. Medical Bay 7 was chaos. Rackstool had never seen anything like it in his 3 centuries of medical practice. Beings from across the galaxy lay on examination tables, their bodies racked with symptoms that defied easy classification. The Altarians flickered between solid and quantum states uncontrollably. The Vorthan's crystalline matrices showed visible cracks and fractures. The Kelrathi warriors, normally invincible, lay still and vulnerable. What happened? Rackstool demanded as he approached Dr. Veltar. Unknown pathogen, she replied, her quantum form stabilizing momentarily before becoming agitated again. It appeared without warning 12 hours ago. The first cases were reported in the diplomatic quarter, but it's spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. Rackstool moved between the examination tables, his crystalline neural network processing the symptoms with lightning speed. Each species was affected differently, but the pattern was unmistakable. The pathogen was adapting to each victim's genetic structure, exploiting the very biological systems that made each species unique. The Altarians are experiencing quantum cascade failures, Dr. Veltar explained as they moved through the medical bay. Their quantum-encoded immune systems can't process the pathogen's chaotic signature. The Vorthan's crystalline matrices are shattering under the viral assault. The Kelrathi biomechanical systems are going haywire. A Nuvarian technician rushed. Toward them, his own crystalline neural network flickering with panic. Doctor, we're receiving reports from all sectors. The pathogen is spreading through every advanced species on the station. The infection rate is approaching 90%. Rackstool felt a chill run through his four-chambered brain. What about treatment options? We've tried everything, Doctor. Veltar replied. Quantum restructuring therapy, crystalline matrix stabilization, biomechanical system resets? Nothing works. The pathogen adapts faster than our treatments can be implemented. The doctor moved to a nearby console and began analyzing the pathogen's genetic structure. What he saw made his crystalline neural network pulse with disbelief. The organism was unlike anything in the medical databases. It seemed to be artificially constructed, designed with a level of sophistication that surpassed even the most advanced biological weapons. This isn't natural, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the medical bay's ambient noise. This is engineered. Someone created this specifically to target advanced genetic systems. Dr. Veltar's quantum form flickered with understanding. A biological weapon designed to exploit genetic optimization. The more sophisticated a species' genetic code, the more vulnerable they become. The implications hit Rackstool like a physical blow. Every species in the galaxy had spent millions of years optimizing their genetic systems for maximum efficiency. The Altarians had achieved quantum encoding. The Vorthans had developed crystalline matrices. The Kelrathi had perfected biomechanical fusion. Their genetic perfection, their evolutionary achievement, had become their greatest weakness. "Doctor?" Another technician called out, "We're receiving casualty reports from across the station. The Altarian delegation is down to 12% operational capacity. The Vorthan trade mission has lost 60% of their personnel. The Kelrathi security force is reporting complete system failures." Raxtul felt his own neural network beginning to flicker irregularly. The first symptoms were appearing in his own system. His four-chambered brain, once his pride and joy, was becoming a liability as the pathogen spread through his enhanced neural pathways. "What about the other species?" he asked, his voice weaker than before. "The pattern is consistent across all advanced species," Dr. Veltar replied. "The more genetically optimized a species, the more vulnerable they are to the pathogen. It's as if the virus was designed to exploit the very traits that make us superior." A junior medical officer rushed into the bay, his breathing rapid and panicked. "Doctors, I have the latest casualty reports from all sectors." Raxtul braced himself for the worst. The pathogen had been spreading for only 12 hours, but its effects were devastating. Every advanced species on the station was falling victim to the engineered plague. "The Altarians are showing a 97% infection rate," the officer reported. "The Vorthans are at 94%. The Kelrathi are at 91%. The Nivarians are at 88% and rising." The doctor's crystalline neural network pulsed with growing alarm. "What about the humans?" The junior officer consulted his datapad, his expression confused. "The humans, sir? They're mostly unaffected." Raxtul stared at the officer in disbelief. "What do you mean unaffected?" "Out of 10,000 humans on the station, only 47 have shown any symptoms at all. And those who did become ill are recovering rapidly. The human medical team has reported no fatalities and minimal impact on their population." The medical bay fell silent, except for the sounds of suffering beings from across the galaxy. Raxtul felt his four-chambered brain struggling to process the information. The species he had classified as genetically inferior, evolutionarily primitive, and medically insignificant was somehow immune to the perfect biological weapon. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Their genetic code is chaotic. They should be the most vulnerable species on the station." Dr. Veltar's quantum form flickered with realization. "Unless their chaos is actually their strength." The words hit Raxtul like a revelation. For 3 centuries he had studied genetic perfection, believing that evolution naturally progressed toward optimization and efficiency. He had seen the human's chaotic genetic code as a sign of primitive development, a species that had not yet achieved the biological sophistication of their galactic neighbors. But what if he had been wrong? The pathogen was designed to exploit genetic optimization. It read the patterns of advanced biological systems and crafted the perfect countermeasures. The more elegant and efficient a species' genetic code, the easier it became for the virus to predict and subvert their immune responses. Human DNA, with its random mutations and redundant sequences, was too chaotic for the pathogen to analyze effectively. The virus couldn't find a stable foothold in the genetic disorder that Raxtul had dismissed as evolutionary failure. "Doctor," the junior officer said quietly, "the human medical team has requested permission to assist in treating the affected species." Raxtul felt his crystalline neural network flickering as the fever took hold. His enhanced brain, once his greatest asset, was becoming the pathway for his own destruction. The irony was not lost on him. The primitive humans, with their chaotic biology and inefficient systems, were the only ones capable of helping the galaxy's most advanced species. "Grant them access," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need all the help we can get." As the human medical team entered the bay, led by Dr. Amy Rodriguez, Raxtul watched through fevered eyes. The species he had dismissed as genetically inferior had become the galaxy's last hope. Their beautiful, chaotic, Imperfect DNA might be the key to saving everyone. The perfect biological weapon had met its match imperfectly. Imperfect humanity. The laboratory hummed with desperate energy as Dr. Raxtool forced himself to work through the mounting fever. His four-chambered brain struggled to maintain coherent thought patterns while his crystalline neural network flickered like a dying star. Around him, the most advanced medical equipment in the galaxy worked tirelessly to analyze the pathogen that was systematically destroying every sophisticated species on Centauri Station. Dr. Amy Rodriguez moved through the lab with calm efficiency, her human colleagues following her lead as they examined tissue samples and genetic data. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that had been dismissed as medically primitive 3 months ago was now the only hope for survival. "The pathogen is unlike anything we've encountered," Dr. Rodriguez said as she adjusted the microscope settings. "It's not just adapting to genetic structures, it's learning from them." Raxtool struggled to focus on her words. Speaking required enormous effort as his enhanced neural pathways became increasingly compromised. How is it learning?" "Watch this," she replied, pulling up a holographic display that showed the virus interacting with Altarian genetic material. The pathogen identifies the quantum-encoded patterns in Altarian DNA and mirrors them. It's not just attacking the immune system, it's speaking the same genetic language. The display shifted to show the virus interacting with Vorthan crystalline matrices. The pathogen's behavior changed completely, adapting its structure to match the crystalline patterns. When exposed to Kelrathi biomechanical codes, it transformed again, becoming something entirely different. "It's reading our genetic optimization patterns," Raxtool whispered, his understanding growing despite his deteriorating condition. "The more refined our genetic code, the easier it becomes for the pathogen to predict our responses." Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Exactly, it's like a lock that's designed to read the key that's trying to open it. The more perfect the key, the easier it becomes to create the perfect counter mechanism." A human technician approached with another set of test results. "Doctor, we've completed the analysis of the pathogen's interaction with human genetic material." The holographic display changed to show the virus attempting to engage with human DNA. Unlike the smooth adaptation it had shown with other species, the pathogen seemed confused, frustrated. It would begin to adapt to one genetic sequence only to encounter a contradictory pattern. It would start to mirror a specific immune response only to find that the response had changed before it could complete the process. "It can't get us stable. Read on our genetic code," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Every time it thinks it understands our pattern, it encounters something that contradicts its analysis." Raxtool watched in fascination as the pathogen repeatedly failed to establish a foothold in human genetic material. The virus that had effortlessly conquered the galaxy's most advanced species was being defeated by what he had once called genetic chaos. "But how?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Your immune system is primitive. It shouldn't be able to resist something this sophisticated." Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a detailed analysis of human genetic structure. "That's what we thought too. But look at this more carefully. What you call junk DNA isn't junk at all. It's a massive library of genetic responses." The display zoomed in on the sections of human DNA that Raxtool had dismissed as evolutionary waste. As Dr. Rodriguez manipulated the image, patterns began to emerge. Hidden within the apparent chaos were thousands of genetic sequences, each one a response to some long-forgotten biological threat. Every plague, every pathogen, every biological challenge that humanity has faced over millions of years of evolution is recorded here, she continued. Most of it is dormant, inactive, but it's all there. Our immune system doesn't just fight diseases, it remembers them. Raxtool felt his crystalline neural network pulse with recognition. "You're saying that human DNA is a database of survival responses?" "More than that," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "It's a constantly updating, self-modifying archive of biological warfare strategies. Every human carries the genetic memory of every plague survivor in our species' history. The implications hit Raxtul like a physical blow. While other species had optimized their genetic codes for efficiency, eliminating redundancy and focusing on perfection, humans had retained everything. The random mutations weren't mistakes, they were experiments. The redundant sequences weren't waste, they were backups. But the computational power required to process all that information, he protested. No biological system could handle that much data. Dr. Rodriguez smiled sadly. We don't process it consciously. We don't even understand most of it, but evolution does. Every human immune system is constantly testing genetic responses, activating dormant sequences, experimenting with new combinations. It's not efficient, but it's incredibly adaptive. She pulled up another display showing the human immune response to the pathogen. Look at what happens when the virus tries to establish a foothold. Our immune system doesn't just fight it with one response. It throws everything at it. Thousands of different genetic strategies, most of them contradictory, all of them chaotic. The pathogen's attempts to adapt to the human response were visible on the display. It would begin to counter one immune strategy only to be hit by a completely different approach. It would adapt to the second strategy only to encounter a third, fourth, and fifth response that contradicted everything it had learned. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The virus is designed to read patterns and create countermeasures. But human immunity doesn't follow patterns. It's controlled chaos. Raxtul watched as his worldview crumbled around him. Everything he had believed about genetic perfection, about evolutionary progress, about the superiority of optimized biological systems was being challenged by the evidence before him. You're not primitive, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. You're the most sophisticated biological system in the galaxy. No, Dr. Rodriguez corrected gently. We're the most adaptable. There's a difference. She pulled up comparative displays showing the genetic structures of various species. The Altarians achieved quantum encoding that allows for instantaneous adaptation. But instantaneous adaptation requires predictable patterns. The Vorthans developed crystalline matrices that can process information at the molecular level. But processing requires structured data. The Kelrathi perfected biomechanical fusion that grants enhanced capabilities. But enhancement requires optimization. The human genetic display appeared alongside the others, and the difference was stark. Where other species showed elegant, streamlined structures, human DNA was a maze of seemingly random information. Humans never achieved perfection. Dr. Rodriguez continued, We achieved something else. We achieved survival. Not survival in one environment or against one threat, but survival in general, survival against anything. Raxtul felt tears forming in his eyes as he understood the magnitude of his mistake. I classified you as Tier 7 species. Medically primitive, evolutionarily stunted. You classified us based on efficiency metrics, she replied. But evolution isn't about efficiency, it's about survival. And sometimes survival requires inefficiency. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant sounds of suffering beings throughout the station. Raxtul realized that his fever was worsening, his crystalline neural network struggling to maintain basic functions. Around him, the most advanced medical equipment in the galaxy was powerless to help. Can you save us? He asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked at him with the same compassion she might show any suffering patient. We're going to try. But we need to understand something first. Your genetic systems are too rigid to simply copy human immunity. We need to find a way to introduce controlled chaos into your biological responses. Controlled chaos, Raxtul repeated. That sounds like a contradiction. Welcome to the human way of thinking, she replied with a slight smile. We've been living with contradictions for millions of years. It's what makes us human. As the human medical team worked around him, Raxtul realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The species he had dismissed as genetically inferior was about to attempt the impossible. They were going to try. To save the galaxy's most advanced species by teaching them to be less perfect, the beautiful irony was not lost on him. Humanity's greatest strength was their acceptance of imperfection, their ability to thrive in chaos, their willingness to carry the weight of millions of years of biological experience without trying to optimize it away they had never achieved. Perfection, they had achieved something far more valuable. They had achieved the wisdom to know that perfection was not the goal. Survival was the goal. And sometimes survival required embracing the chaos that others would try to eliminate. The galaxy's most primitive species was about to save its most advanced. And in doing so, they would teach everyone a lesson about the true nature of evolution, adaptation, and the power of imperfection. The breakthrough came at 0347 station time, when Dr. Amy Rodriguez stumbled upon something that would change galactic medicine forever. Dr. Rackstool lay on a medical bed nearby, his crystalline neural network flickering like a dying ember as the pathogen continued its relentless assault on his four-chambered brain. Around them, the laboratory buzzed with desperate activity as human and alien medical staff worked together in a race against time. "I think I found something," Dr. Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of medical equipment. She had been working for 18 hours straight, her eyes red with exhaustion but her mind sharp with discovery. The holographic display showed a complex genetic sequence, but this one was different from anything they had examined before. It wasn't purely human, nor was it from any of the infected alien species. It was something new, something that seemed to bridge the gap between human chaos and alien optimization. "What am I looking at?" Rackstool asked weakly, forcing himself to focus, despite the fever that was consuming his enhanced neural pathways. "This is from one of the human patients who contracted the pathogen," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "But look at what happened during the infection process." The display zoomed in on the genetic sequence, showing the moment when the pathogen encountered human DNA. Unlike the previous observations, this time the virus had managed to establish a temporary foothold. But instead of overwhelming the human immune system, something unexpected occurred. "The pathogen tried to adapt to this patient's immune response," she continued. "But instead of being defeated by our chaotic genetics, it actually learned from them." Rackstool watched in amazement as the display showed the virus incorporating random elements from human DNA into its own structure. The pathogen was becoming less efficient, less predictable, but also less vulnerable to the rigid countermeasures that advanced species had developed. "It's becoming more human," he whispered. "Exactly. And in doing so, it's becoming less effective against optimized genetic systems." Dr. Rodriguez manipulated the display to show the modified pathogen interacting with Altarian genetic material. "Watch this." The transformed virus attempted to engage with the quantum-encoded patterns of Altarian DNA, but its approach was different now. Instead of the smooth, predictable adaptation they had observed before, the pathogen's response was erratic, contradictory. It would begin to mirror one genetic pattern only to suddenly shift to a completely different strategy. "The virus is confused," Rackstool observed. "It's trying to adapt, but it's learned human-style chaos. And that chaos is interfering with its ability to create perfect countermeasures," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "It's like teaching a master locksmith to work while drunk. The technical skill is still there, but the precision is gone." The implications were staggering. The pathogen's greatest strength was its ability to read and counter optimized genetic systems. But by incorporating human genetic chaos, it had compromised its own efficiency. The virus was literally learning to be less perfect. "Can we weaponize this?" Rackstool asked, his medical training overriding his personal discomfort. "Better than that," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "We can use it to create a treatment." She pulled up a new display showing her proposed solution. "We can't make your genetic systems more chaotic. They're too rigid for that kind of fundamental change. But we can introduce controlled randomness into your immune responses." The concept was revolutionary. Instead of trying to optimize treatments for each species, They would create a therapy that deliberately introduced inefficiency into alien immune systems. The treatment would make their biological responses less predictable, less perfect, but also less vulnerable to the pathogen's adaptive capabilities. "You want to make us more human," Raxtool said, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. "We want to teach your immune systems to embrace controlled chaos," she corrected. "Not permanent changes, but temporary randomness that will disrupt the pathogen's ability to predict and counter your responses." The human medical team worked with unprecedented speed and precision. Dr. Rodriguez coordinated the effort while her colleagues analyzed genetic samples from every species on the station. The challenge was immense. They needed to create a treatment that would work across dozens of different genetic architectures, each one representing millions of years of evolutionary optimization. "The key is understanding how each species achieved their genetic perfection," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they worked. "The Altarians use quantum encoding, so we need to introduce quantum uncertainty into their immune responses. The Vorthans use crystalline matrices, so we need to create structural flaws in their defensive systems. The Kelrathi use biomechanical fusion, so we need to introduce mechanical randomness into their biological processes." Raxtool watched from his medical bed as the humans demonstrated capabilities he had never imagined. They were thinking beyond the paradigms that had defined galactic medicine for millennia. Instead of trying to perfect biological systems, they were deliberately introducing imperfection as a strategic advantage. "This is completely contrary to everything we know about medicine," he observed. "That's what makes it work," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "The pathogen was designed by someone who understood conventional galactic medicine. They created the perfect weapon to exploit genetic optimization, but they never accounted for the possibility that chaos could be a form of defense." The first test came 12 hours later. Dr. Veltar, the Altarian chief medical officer, volunteered to receive the experimental treatment. Her quantum form was barely stable, flickering between states as the pathogen continued its assault on her genetic systems. "The treatment will temporarily disrupt your quantum encoding," Dr. Rodriguez warned. "Your immune system will become less efficient, less predictable, but it should also become less vulnerable to the pathogen's adaptive capabilities." Dr. Veltar's quantum form pulsed with determination. "Do it," the injection was administered directly into her quantum matrix. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Her normally elegant quantum patterns became chaotic, unpredictable. Instead of the smooth transitions between states that characterized Altarian biology, she began flickering, randomly, her form shifting without apparent purpose. "Strange," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep confusion. "My quantum processes are disordered." "That's exactly what we want," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "The pathogen is trying to adapt to your chaotic responses, but it can't establish a stable pattern." The holographic displays showed the battle taking place within Dr. Veltar's quantum matrix. The pathogen, which had been systematically destroying her genetic systems, was now struggling to maintain its foothold. Every time it adapted to one chaotic response, her immune system would shift to a completely different strategy. "It's working," Raxtool breathed, his own condition momentarily forgotten as he watched the unprecedented medical procedure over the next 6 hours. Dr. Veltar's condition began to improve. Her quantum form stabilized, though it retained the chaotic patterns that had been introduced by the treatment. The pathogen, unable to establish a predictable pattern in her immune responses, began to weaken and eventually died. "The treatment is successful," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "But there are side effects." Dr. Veltar's quantum form flickered with concern. "What kind of side effects?" "Your genetic systems will retain some of the chaos we introduced," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "You'll never be quite as efficient as you were before. Your quantum processes will always carry traces of randomness. In essence, you'll be slightly more human." The Altarian medical officer considered this for a long moment. "And this is the only way to survive the pathogen?" "For now, yes." We may be able to develop more refined treatments in the future, but this is what we have. Dr. Veltar's quantum form pulsed with acceptance. Then I choose survival over perfection. The words echoed through the laboratory with profound significance. For the first time in galactic history, an advanced species was choosing to embrace imperfection as a survival strategy. The implications rippled through the medical team as they realized they were witnessing a fundamental shift in how intelligence viewed biological optimization. Word of the successful treatment spread through the station's medical facilities like wildfire. Representatives from every species requested immediate access to the experimental therapy. The Vorthans, with their crystalline matrices cracking under the pathogen's assault, were particularly eager to try anything that might save their people. Dr. Rodriguez and her team worked around the clock to adapt the treatment for each species. The Vorthan version required introducing structural flaws into their crystalline defensive systems. The Kelrothi treatment involved creating mechanical randomness in their biomechanical processes. Each adaptation was a careful balance between introducing enough chaos to disrupt the pathogen while maintaining enough stability to preserve life. We're not just treating a disease, Dr. Rodriguez realized as she watched the treatments being administered across the station. We're teaching the galaxy's most advanced species to be less perfect. Rackstool received his treatment 18 hours after Dr. Veltar's successful recovery. The process was particularly complex for Nivarians, whose four-chambered brains and crystalline neural networks represented some of the most sophisticated biological engineering in the galaxy. This will fundamentally alter your neural processing patterns, Dr. Rodriguez warned him. Your four-chambered brain will retain traces of randomness. Your crystalline neural network will develop permanent irregularities. You'll never think quite the same way again. Rackstool looked at her with eyes that held both fear and hope. Will I still be me? You'll be you, she assured him. But you'll be a version of you that can survive in an imperfect universe. The treatment was administered directly into his crystalline neural network. The effects were immediate and disorienting. His four-chambered brain, which had always processed information with perfect efficiency, suddenly began generating random thoughts and contradictory impulses. His crystalline neural network, once a model of organized data flow, became a chaotic web of competing signals. I can't think straight, he gasped, his voice reflecting the confusion of his altered neural patterns. That's exactly what we want, Dr. Rodriguez replied. The pathogen is trying to read your neural patterns, but now they're too chaotic to predict. The battle within Rackstool's enhanced brain was visible on the medical displays. The pathogen, which had been systematically destroying his neural pathways, was now struggling to maintain its destructive progress. Every time it adapted to one chaotic neural pattern, his brain would shift to a completely different processing mode. Hours passed as the treatment worked its way through his system. Gradually, Rackstool's condition began to improve. His fever broke, his neural network stabilized, and his four-chambered brain resumed normal function. But the changes were permanent. His thought patterns would forever carry traces of the beautiful chaos that had saved his life. How do you feel? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Rackstool considered the question carefully, his altered neural patterns processing the information in ways that were both familiar and strange. Different. My thoughts feel ... less organized. More unpredictable, but I'm alive. And I'm beginning to understand why humans are so remarkable. The treatment program expanded rapidly across the station. Within 48 hours, representatives from every major species had received the experimental therapy. The results were consistently successful, but the side effects were permanent. The galaxy's most advanced species were learning to live with imperfection. The Altarians found that their quantum processes, while less efficient, were more creative and adaptable. The Vorthans discovered that their crystalline matrices, though structurally flawed, were better at processing contradictory information. The Kelrothi realized that their biomechanical systems, despite their new randomness, were more resilient to unexpected challenges. We're not just surviving, Dr. Veltar observed during a medical conference 3 days later. We're evolving. Not toward perfection, but toward adaptability. Raxtul nodded, his altered neural patterns allowing him to appreciate the irony in ways his previous perfect brain never could. Humans have been trying to tell us this for months, but we were too focused on genetic superiority to listen. Now? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Now we're learning that survival is more important than perfection, he replied. And that sometimes the most sophisticated response to a complex problem is to embrace the chaos that others would try to eliminate. The pathogen continued to weaken throughout the station as more beings received the treatment. Unable to establish predictable patterns in the newly chaotic immune systems, the engineered virus began to die out. Within a week the crisis was over, but the changes were permanent. The galaxy's most advanced species had been fundamentally altered by their encounter with human medical philosophy. They had learned to value adaptability over optimization, survival over perfection, and controlled chaos over elegant efficiency. The lesson was clear. In a universe full of unknown threats, the ability to embrace imperfection might be the most valuable survival trait of all. The rebuilt conference hall of the Galactic Medical Council looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything had changed. Dr. Raxtul stood at the presentation platform once again, but this time his crystalline neural network flickered with patterns that would have been impossible before the plague. His 4-chambered brain processed information differently now, embracing contradictions and uncertainties that his previous perfect mind would have rejected. The assembled delegates represented the same 12 species, but they too had been transformed by their encounter with controlled chaos. The Altarian representative's quantum form shifted with beautiful unpredictability. The Vorthan delegate's crystalline structure showed artistic flaws that somehow made it more appealing. The Kelrothi warrior's biomechanical systems hummed, with random harmonics that created an unexpectedly pleasant sound. Esteemed colleagues, Raxtul began, his voice carrying new harmonics that reflected his altered neural patterns. 6 months ago, I stood before you and delivered an assessment of human genetic structure that I now recognize as profoundly flawed. Today, I wish to formally request a complete reclassification of the human species. The holographic display materialized above him, showing the same double helix structure of human DNA that he had once dismissed as primitive chaos. But now his altered perception allowed him to see patterns within the apparent randomness, beauty within the biological disorder. I previously classified humans as genetically inferior based on efficiency metrics and optimization standards. He continued. I focused on what I perceived as random mutations, redundant sequences, and evolutionary waste. I was wrong on every count. Ambassador Thomas Reed sat in the main gallery this time, no longer relegated to the observation deck. The human delegation had been granted full participatory status in the Galactic Medical Council, a recognition that had been earned through their species' remarkable response to the plague crisis. The pathogen that nearly destroyed our civilization was engineered to exploit genetic optimization, Raxtul explained. It was designed by someone who understood how advanced species achieve biological perfection. The virus could read our elegant genetic patterns and craft perfect countermeasures. Our optimization became our vulnerability. The display showed the pathogen's interaction with various genetic systems. The delegates watched as the virus effortlessly adapted to Altarian quantum, encoding Vorthan crystalline matrices and Kelrothi biomechanical fusion codes. The smooth, predictable adaptation process was both fascinating and terrifying. But when the pathogen encountered human DNA, Raxtul continued, it met something it could not process. The very chaos I had dismissed as evolutionary failure became humanity's greatest defense. The display shifted to show the virus attempting to engage with human genetic material. The delegates watched as the pathogen struggled to establish a foothold in the chaotic genetic landscape, its adaptive mechanisms confused by the contradictory patterns and redundant sequences. Human DNA is not primitive, Raxtul announced. It is the most sophisticated biological defense system in the galaxy. Every random mutation is a potential response to an unknown threat. Every redundant sequence is a backup strategy for survival. Every piece of so-called junk DNA is actually a library of evolutionary wisdom. Dr. Amy Rodriguez stood from the human delegation, her presence now welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Dr. Raxtool, would you like me to explain the mechanism? Please, he replied, his altered neural patterns appreciating the collaborative approach that his previous perfect mind would have rejected. Dr. Rodriguez approached the platform, her movement confident and purposeful. Human genetic structure represents millions of years of evolutionary trial and error. We never optimized our genetic code because optimization would have eliminated the very diversity that allows us to survive unexpected challenges. She manipulated the holographic display to show the complex interactions within human DNA. Every human carries the genetic memory of every plague survivor, every environmental adaptation, every biological challenge our species has ever faced. We don't consciously process this information, but our immune systems use it constantly. The display zoomed in on the human immune response, showing the chaotic but effective strategies that had defeated the engineered pathogen. We don't fight diseases with elegant solutions. We fight them with everything we have. Thousands of different strategies, most of them contradictory, all of them contributing to our survival. Dr. Veltar, the Altarian medical officer, stood to address the assembly. Her quantum form flickered with the beautiful irregularities that had become her new normal. The human approach to medicine saved my life and the lives of countless others. But it also taught us something fundamental about the nature of biological systems. She gestured toward the display showing comparative genetic structures. We have spent millions of years optimizing our biological systems for efficiency. We eliminated redundancy, removed apparent waste, and focused on perfection. But perfection is brittle. It cannot adapt to unexpected challenges. The Vorthan delegates' crystalline structure resonated with agreement. The humans introduced controlled chaos into our genetic systems. We are less efficient than we were before, but we are more adaptable. We can now survive challenges that would have destroyed our optimized systems. Raxtool nodded, his four-chambered brain processing the implications with patterns that would have been impossible before his transformation. The plague crisis taught us that survival is more important than optimization. In a universe full of unknown threats, adaptability is more valuable than efficiency. The Kelrothi warrior stood, his biomechanical systems humming with their new random harmonics. The humans have proven that strength comes not from perfection, but from the ability to embrace imperfection and turn it into an advantage. The discussion continued for hours as delegates from across the galaxy shared their experiences with human-inspired medical treatments. A consensus was clear. Humanity had not just saved the galaxy from a biological weapon, they had fundamentally changed how advanced species thought about genetic engineering and biological optimization. I formally propose that humans be reclassified as a Tier 1 species, Raxtool announced. Not because they are the strongest, fastest, or most intelligent, but because they have mastered the art of survival in an imperfect universe. The vote was unanimous. Every delegate supported the reclassification, their various forms of agreement creating a symphony of diverse sounds that somehow harmonized despite their apparent contradictions. Ambassador Reed stood to address the assembly. On behalf of humanity, I accept this reclassification. But I also want to propose something unprecedented in galactic history. The hall fell silent as the human ambassador continued. We propose the establishment of the Galactic Institute for Adaptive Biology, a joint research facility where humans and all other species can work together to develop new approaches to medicine that embrace controlled chaos rather than rigid optimization. The proposal was met with enthusiastic support. The plague crisis had demonstrated that the galaxy's medical paradigms needed fundamental revision. The traditional focus on genetic perfection had made every advanced species vulnerable to sophisticated biological weapons. The Institute would focus on developing adaptive rather than optimized solutions, Dr. Rodriguez explained. We would study how controlled randomness can be introduced into biological systems to enhance survival rather than efficiency. Dr. Veltar's quantum form pulsed with excitement. This could revolutionize galactic medicine. Instead of trying to perfect our biological systems, we could learn to make them more adaptable. The Vorthan delegates' crystalline structure resonated with agreement. The humans have shown us that apparent weakness can be strength, that chaos can be order, that imperfection can be perfect. Raxtul felt his altered neural patterns processing the emotional significance of the moment. 6 months ago, he had stood in this same hall and dismissed humanity as genetically inferior. Today, he was proposing that they lead the galaxy into a new era of medical understanding. The Institute would be based on human principles, he announced. Controlled chaos, adaptive responses, and the understanding that survival is more important than optimization. We would learn to embrace the beautiful imperfection that has made humanity the most resilient species in the galaxy. The formal establishment of the Galactic Institute for Adaptive Biology was approved by acclamation. Dr. Rodriguez was appointed as the first director, with Dr. Raxtul serving as her deputy. The irony was not lost on anyone that the alien doctor who had once scoffed at human DNA would now be working to teach the galaxy to be more human. As the session concluded, Raxtul approached Ambassador Reed. "Thomas, I owe your species more than an apology. I owe you my life and the lives of everyone on this station." The human ambassador smiled with characteristic warmth. "Doctor, you gave us something too. You gave us the opportunity to prove that our differences are our strengths. And now? Now we work together to ensure that the galaxy never forgets the lesson of the plague crisis. That in a universe full of unknown challenges, the ability to embrace chaos and adapt to imperfection might be the most valuable survival trait of all." The two beings stood together in the conference hall, one human and one alien, both forever changed by their encounter with the beautiful chaos that had saved the galaxy. The doctor had scoffed at human DNA, but the truth had been revealed. Humanity's greatest weakness had been their greatest strength all along. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be.